All right, guys. Well, we are back to Pavement for the third time. We've previously done Crooked Rain, and Slanted and Enchanted, and now we got WOWEE ZOWEE. In the montage, I believe, the opener, I should say, I believe I picked Flux equals Rad, and now we're going to listen to a little bit of Best Friend's Arm. So, Matt, run the numbers for me.
Okay, so Pavement's WOWEE ZOWEE comes in at number 124 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 11 in 1995, number 708 of all time. It's Pavement's third highest rated album behind 1992's Slanted and Enchanted and 1994's Crooked Rain, both albums we covered before. WOWEE ZOWEE did make Rolling Stone's list at number 265, and Pavement is ranked number 110 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
All right. Well, we've covered Pavement in bio form before, and so I would direct you to both of our episodes where we covered the earlier two albums. So I'm going to focus more on this specific album and what went into it, as opposed to like who Pavement is. But this is their third studio album. Was released on April 11th, 1995 on Matador Records. Most of it was recorded in Memphis, Tennessee at Easley Recording was the name of the studio. A lot of the members of the band had just come off working on an album with friends of theirs called the Silver Jews. We haven't covered them, but they were sort of like a cult band, in the 90s, like underground. I would say they were on an album called Starlight Walker. And this is sort of considered a return to a more eclectic version of Pavement. I think the reason it gets that is because a year earlier, they'd released Crooked Rain, and kind of they were tabbed as a band that might be able to break into the mainstream. And, this was sort of like considered to be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, they don't want to break into the mainstream with kind of what they were going for here. So it was designed to feature a variety of styles. It also was recorded in a very short period of time. The band members have wildly different viewpoints on this album, ranging from it being their favorite album to their least favorite album, depending on who you talk to in the band. There was a lot of things that were like peak Pavement on this, like the album was basically about an hour long, and if you bought the vinyl of it, the first three sides of the vinyls would be the album, and then side 4 was left blank. There was just an empty side altogether on it if you bought the album. So that must have been a fun listen as you were waiting for stuff to come in along the way. It was pretty well received by critics. It's when I'm reading through the critics, it's very interesting because the critics that loved it, it was like hosannas, right? Like, this is an incredible album. Like, Village Voice had it as the number 2 album and stuff. But there was a not insignificant amount of critics that were very negative on this album as well. They were the minority compared to most, but it was a very interesting mix of those that loved it, and those that didn't like it, like really didn't like it at all. The whole album was recorded in a 10-day period from November 14th to 24th in 1994. Some of the songs on this were outtakes from Crooked Rain that they just re-recorded with different and what they would consider to be better equipment. And they actually had been playing many of the songs on this album for over a year on set lists when they would play live. Stephen Malkmus actually came up with the whole sequence of this album. Like, basically they created a bunch of songs, most of which he wrote, but actually Scott Canberg wrote some of the songs as well. But the end result was solely Stephen Malkmus picking like what went on this. There was a philosophical difference, and when you hear about the philosophical difference, I'll let you guess who this is their favorite album and who it's their least favorite album. But the band actually started with 20 different songs at the beginning, and then they ended up considering the possibility of putting them all on the album. Scott Canberg, who had been the person who had actually sequenced their previous albums, wanted about 10 songs that had a thematic feel that felt cohesive. But Stephen Malcolmus wanted it to be an album that was largely like a collection of what they considered to be B-sides. So Stephen Malcolmus won that sort of discussion. And so I think from the band's point of view, they considered this to almost be like a B-sides album. They actually had a theme that, like, the side 4, as I mentioned before, was blank, and there was an empty thought bubble printed on the label for that instead of track listings. It is their longest studio album as well, at almost an hour. Their other albums were famously relatively short. Yeah, and the goal was to sort of put out an album that was experimental and sort of genre shifting along the way. They had sort of themes they were going for with the songs they were writing, and they played around with equipment and production on this album quite a bit as well. And that was a big piece of it. It was kind of designed to be an exploration of sound as well, and they put some thought into the cover art as well. The cover art for this album is a painting by the American artist Stephen Keen, and it's a repurpose of a Life magazine photo called The World from 1972, and it depicts 2 Arab women and a goat is what the picture is. So Steve Malcolmus actually went to a showing of Keen's music and was on there. So there's other stuff, and I will put it in there along the way. One last thing I want to mention is that they actually had thought about, they meaning Pavement, about organizing their own music festival. And they were going to invite around bands that they liked, and people that they had identified as being on their show that they wanted to be there were the Breeders, Beck, and Sonic Youth. However, that year, 1995, wild year, because that year, Lollapalooza was headlined by Sonic Youth that year, guys. And we're not even talking like Dirty or Goo Sonic Youth. This is like back to being experimental, like Sonic Youth. And so before they pitched the idea to Sonic Youth said to them, hey, do you want to play on the Lollapalooza where we're headlining? And Pavement couldn't pass up that, so Pavement actually played Lollapalooza instead. So the top 2 headliners of Lollapalooza 1995 were Sonic Youth and Pavement, which I find to be funny as a description of what 1995 was and just what it was as a year in rock music. So there we go. Matt, I'll give you first take on Wowee Zowie.
Yeah, first time actually listening to this record. For all the talk of like me being maybe the one that likes Pavement the most. The only album that I ever knew or owned was Crooked Rain. So, so I like the fact that we're covering them more and getting more into their catalog. Isn't this? I want to say, wasn't this like the name of this record came after a Frank? Wasn't there a Frank Zappa song, Wowee Zowie?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I thought I remembered that correctly, but yeah, so this is definitely branching out. This is less cohesive, I think, is for a Pavement record. And, Pavement's kind of not really a cohesive band. I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of defines them is just how discordant they can be, how, they go in these weird directions, these different beats and stuff. Like, they are a non-traditional band for sure. And so it can be a lot to get through this, but I really liked it. I liked the variety on here. I thought it started really interesting with We Dance. It's almost like this acoustic song that's maybe one of the more straightforward songs of the record. It's almost like a Neil Young kind of acoustic
That's what I wrote down.
type song. Okay, yeah, see? Right? So it's like, that's like a song that Neil Young would do like in the 60s or whatever, just like from after the Gold Rush or whatever. But then they kind of kick more into, the avant-garde stuff. I thought Grounded was a really interesting track. That reminded me, that guitar part that they have at the beginning of there sounds like the Explosions in the Sky, as kind of like that type of like this pinging guitar sound, this echoey kind of.
Is that a band, Explosions in the Sky?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Are we gonna? We should cover them. They're all instrumental.
We will cover them later.
So remember. So when we get to Explosions in the Sky, come back. Just listen to the beginning of Yeah, just go to the beginning.
Hey,
of
Alexa.
Grounded. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I like that, but then they do stuff like, I thought Serpentine Pad was an interesting choice. This is kind of, they're going more of in a punk direction, and then like, geez, Flux Equals Rad. I'm like, okay, that's early Nirvana, like he's just trying to channel that. So
Do you know what song specifically they identified? You want to take a guess as to what
the Nirvana
song?
Oh God, no, I'm not going to be able to pull that right now.
Viewed as sort of like territorial pissings.
Okay, yep, there you go. And Half a Canyon was like a White Stripes song. It was like Ball and Biscuit, Yeah. So they're also drawing on these bands that I love as well. Some who have existed already, some who haven't. So it's kind of like, you're paying homage, but you're also like, I guess, I mean, White Stripes is like, that's pretty derivative. But Explosions in the Sky, that's kind of something that wasn't out just yet. But I liked the majority of these songs. Yeah, it's long, but I also didn't feel tired listening to this. Like I thought that the variety served it well. I guess maybe it could have been a better album if you tightened it up a little bit, but it's a minor complaint, I think, for me. I thought that towards the end, I think one of the reasons that it probably didn't get boring is because I think some of the better songs are towards the end or the middle part of the end. Like AT&T and Flux Equals Rad are great songs right there. Kennel District sound. It's interesting. I'm reading right now that's one of the two songs that Scott Canberg wrote, and I kind of see that it's a little bit of a different sound than some of the Malcolm stuff, but I really liked Half a Canyon. So I think that the end of this album really, kept my interest going. So yeah, Pavements. It's also interesting that you're saying that they headlined Lollapalooza with Sonic.
Well, they didn't
Youth.
headline. They were one of the lead acts.
One of the lead acts, okay, of along with Sonic Youth, which it's kind of it's another popular noise rock band or avant-garde or different, right? Non-traditional, whatever you want to call it. But I just think that Pavement, one of the reasons I like them more than Sonic Youth is because underneath much of what they do, there's melody, there's something that's a little hooky, there's something that's scratching that itch for me, which I find definitely more appealing than some of the noise rock stuff that Sonic Youth was doing. But so yeah, thumbs up for me. I still probably think Crooked Rain's a better album than this, but I really did like this. I think that this is a great record, and I'm thumbs up on it.
Yeah, Pavement is a band that I have not like fully clicked with yet. I feel like I should, in some ways, like them more than I do. This album's no exception. I do, in some sense, like the variety on the album. You're right. There's like all sorts of different types of styles and sounds on here. You've got there's like a psychedelic feel to the album at times, like on Brink's Job. There is, country with Father to a Sister of Thought with the pedal steel. I thought that was interesting. Best Friend's Arm, I feel like he's intentionally trying to sound like Lou Reed to the point where it's like, are you just copying Lou Reed or something? Like at times they sound like Wilco too. And I do like the guitar on this album, like on Flux Equals Rad. I thought that was a great song. And like you said, man, I liked Half a Canyon too, just because it was so White Stripes. So I respect the fact that they are trying and doing different things on the album, but it also feels very kind of compilation, like a B-sides album, or like Slapdash, or like Rough Around the Edges.
Well, that's what Stephen Malkmus said it was, basically, like a B-sides album, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I feel. So I'm not like I'm not saying they don't care about the album or the band or anything, but it just feels, maybe rushed is not the right word, but not fully thought out, not fully fleshed out in some way. And I still like Crooked Rain the most of the three albums that we've talked about. That resonated with me more. And so I'm still kind of just on the fence with them. Not in a bad way, just like still, this band's always cited as some people's like favorite band, and or like a real cult favorite or something, and I'm just like not there with this band, and there's something missing. I'm not totally sold on his singing voice either. Sometimes it really works depending on the song, sometimes I bump up against it. So so yeah, I'm really fully, I'm not like checked out on them. I there's enough here that like keeps me interested, and I enjoyed listening to it the multiple times I did this week. But it's not like I'm not like over the moon about Pavement, or like I'm like thinking about it, like pondering, but I'm not like, yeah, this is awesome or something like that. So that's where I'm at with them.
Yeah, it's funny, Matt. You said like you connect with this more than like Sonic Youth, a band that I famously love. And I was thinking about that, and you said it's because you feel there's an underpining melody here that's not in Sonic Youth, which I can understand what you're saying. I mean, I don't think that the goal when Sonic Youth writes a song is, where's the melody at in this? That's not what their vision statement is. Although I would argue that's not really what Pavement's vision statement is either. They might just stumble into it more often, in terms of what they do. But they do share some similarities in terms of like what they're trying to do with their music and their, the mission, kind of, I'd say. I think the difference for me is that what Sonic Youth has that Pavement doesn't have is Sonic Youth has like a real artistic credibility to me, where they're trying like lots of different stuff with fidelity. You know what I mean? Where they are just leaning into the art and they like live it, right? Pavement always just, it's kind of the knock, and I think it's what people love about them. It always does feel like you're only getting 50% of them. And like, I think why this album is like, okay, this is the Pavement that like I didn't connect with, that I would make fun of, and I connected, I went on the record and said, listen, Slanted and Enchanted and Crooked Rain, I am higher on these albums than I gave Pavement credit for. You know what I mean? I like these a lot more. Maybe, it's more I just like to make the joke as much with it. When I listened to this album, I said, okay, a little bit of what I didn't like about Pavement came out in this, which is that I almost would call this album like proto-meme culture almost, guys. Like, it's just sort of like weird references and like... kind of like too clever for its own good in some ways, and just like I don't know, it just always felt like there was that joke like Pavement's slacker rock, and like I get it, but I didn't get that feel as much on the first two albums as this, where it just sort of felt like everything was half finished. Nothing like fully landed for me. I do feel like it was sort of them taking on personas and almost doing like a tribute a little bit, which I have nothing against. I mean, to some degree, we just talked about, R.E.M. Monster, which had a little bit of that same feel to it. But there was just something missing on this album for me. And I think, Josh, that's where I'm with it for you. Unlike you, I didn't find it was missing as much on the other two albums. I know they said this was rushed, and it does feel a little bit rushed. I do think it would have benefited from a little bit more cohesion, just because it was wildly scattershot. In that sense, I use that Double Nickels on the Dime by Minutemen as an example of like an album that the goal was to just do a little bit of everything. But I don't know why that worked for me. I think it was more just because it was such a clear mission statement that it connected with me. And there was a little bit of a central theme to that, though, as an album. This just sort of felt disorienting. I liked it better as I listened to it as the week went on. I'm with you, Matt. I think as the album goes on, it gets better. I like the second half a lot better than I liked the first half. But the sort of playing like the opposite of what would be a traditional chord progression didn't bother me as much on earlier albums as it did on this album. And I think it's because if you're going to like go into doing the blues, or doing like a Velvet Underground song, or doing like punk rock and stuff, I do feel like I would have liked a little bit more faithfulness to what those things were a little bit, instead of always playing it a little bit too clever, I'd say. So that was kind of my takeaway here. It was just a little bit too much. Like, it was a little bit too much Gen X for me, guys, in terms of like the energy of this album. And as a result, it kind of left me lacking a little bit. So I'd say thumbs in the middle for me on this one. I still like it better than I processed that I like Pavement. So maybe that's the revelation of this podcast, that I like Pavement more than I thought I did by quite a bit. That even the album that I didn't like as much is still in mid, as opposed to something that triggered me or I didn't like. But yeah, I was left a little bit flat with this one.
Yeah, it's definitely Gen X-y. And I think didn't Robert Christgau say that like this is like the ultimate '90s band, like the definitive '90s kind of
yes, he
rock
is.
band, something
Robert
like that.
Christgau loves
Yeah.
Pavement. Like
Yeah.
I mean, every time I've covered them and done the bios for them, he is like I said, he named it Village Voice, where he wrote named this the #2 album of the year in 1995. So and he was high on everything they did. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's wrong. It's just, it's always interesting his takes sometimes, because I think he's a very good critic, but sometimes he'll be like very dismissive of something. And I'm just like, that's a weird take to have. And then later, and I do notice a lot of it happens to just have females in front of it that he didn't connect with. I just, I think that was a little bit of his block, like.
It's what's also interesting. If you look, I'm just looking on Wikipedia here, and they've got the contemporary reviews, and they're not very good, right? Like 2.5 stars, Chicago Tribune, 1 star, The Guardian, 2.5 stars.
That's what I said. The ones that didn't like it didn't like it. Yeah.
Q 3 stars, Rolling Stone 2.5, and then you go to retrospective views. It's like All Music 4.5 stars, Rolling Stone Album Guide 4 stars, Spin 5, Uncut 4. So it's one of those records that at the time.
Well, who became
a
rock critic in the 2000s became a very online, very, you know what I mean? Like to some degree, the rock critics became Pavement.
Yeah.
Whereas before they were like boomers or, audiophiles and stuff who would just, you know what I'm saying? Like in the Pitchfork in the 2000s, you got to figure there were a lot of Stephen Malkmuses in that room.
Oh, sure.